The first missile struck Sovereignty Station at exactly 3:47 Galactic Standard Time. Ambassador felt the impact through the floor of his office, a deep rumble that shook the water in his drinking glass. He was a tall being with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that had evolved for the dim light of his. In his 40 years of diplomatic service, he had never felt true fear. He felt it now. The had come, ran through the corridors of the station, his long robes flowing behind him. Around him, beings of a dozen different species fled in all directions. The station housed 17 member races of the Galactic Compact, over 2 million souls who had come here to trade, to negotiate, to live in peace. None of them had expected war. The Dominion had sent no warning. Their fleet had simply appeared at the edge of the system, 200 warships arranged in perfect formation. They were creatures, each standing nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms ending in sharp claws. Their empire had conquered 37 worlds in the last century. They had never lost a war. Reached the command center just as another explosion rocked the station. Through the massive viewport he could see the battle unfolding. The station's defense fleet, 23 small ships that were never meant for true combat, burned in the darkness. One by one, their lights went out. "Ambassador," said Captain, the station's military commander. She was a small mammalian species covered in gray fur. Her voice was steady, but her ears were pressed flat against her skull in terror. "They broke through our outer defenses in less than an hour. We cannot hold them." "How long do we have?" "At their current rate of advance, perhaps 6 hours before they breach the central core." Closed his eyes. 2 million beings, families, children, elderly who had come here to spend their final years in peace. They took no prisoners. Everyone knew this. "Begin evacuation procedures," he said. "Get as many transport ships launched as possible." "They have blockaded the jump points," replied. "Nothing is getting out." On the main, the face of Supreme Commander appeared. He was massive even by standards, his exoskeleton decorated with the markings of 100 victories. His mandibles clicked as he spoke, and the translation system converted his words into cold, mechanical sounds. "Attention, inhabitants of Sovereignty Station. The Galactic Compact has refused our rightful demands. You will now pay the price for their arrogance. Surrender unconditionally, and we may allow some of you to live as servants of the Dominion. Resist, and you will be eliminated. You have 1 hour to decide." The transmission ended. The command center fell into silence. Looked around at the officers present. Pelion. All of them wore the same expression. They were not warriors. They were diplomats, traders, scientists. They had no way to fight 200 warships. A young communications officer named spoke up. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Ambassador, should we try the restricted frequency?" The room became very still. The restricted frequency was reserved for one purpose only. It was the emergency channel that connected to the members of the Galactic Compact, a species that had joined only 30 years ago. They were called humans, and they came from a world called Earth. Earth was what the galaxy called the gravity was crushing. The atmosphere was full of a gas that most species found poisonous. The planet was covered in predators, parasites, and natural disasters, and somehow, impossibly, intelligent life had evolved there. The humans were strange creatures. They were soft and slow compared to most species. They could not see in the dark like thee or smell danger like the. By all logic, they should have been a weak species, barely worthy of notice. But the reports said otherwise. The reports spoke of humans who continued to function after injuries that would kill any other being. They spoke of humans who could adapt to almost any environment, who could eat foods that would poison anyone else, who could travel for days without rest when they needed to. They spoke of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting, surviving, and refusing to die. The Galactic Compact had accepted the humans as members, but they had kept them at a distance. They were unpredictable. They were unsettling. Their ships were primitive, their fleet was small, and no one quite knew what to make of them. Had met humans only twice in his life. Both times, he had felt a strange sensation when looking into their eyes. It took him a long time to understand what he was seeing. It was the look of a predator that had learned to smile. "The humans are 4.7 light-years away," Captain said quietly. "Even if they responded, they could not possibly arrive in time, and their fleet is tiny. What could they do against 200 warships?" "They are our allies," said. "The Compact Treaty requires us to offer aid to any member species in distress. Does that not work both ways?" "The humans have never answered a distress call outside their own sector," another officer said. "There is no reason to believe they would come." Watched the viewport as another defense ship exploded in a flash of light. He thought about the 2 million souls aboard this station. He thought about the children hiding in the lower decks. He thought about what they would do when they broke through. "Send the message," he said. His hands moved across her console. She opened the restricted frequency and began to speak, her voice carrying across the vast emptiness of space. "To any human vessels, this is Sovereignty Station. We are under attack by the Dominion. Our defenses have fallen. We have over 2 million civilians with no way to escape. We are dying, please. If anyone can hear this message, please help us." She sent it 3 times, then sat back, her hands shaking. In the flagship, Supreme Commander received a report that the station had broadcast on an unusual frequency. His intelligence officers quickly identified it as the communication channel used by the made a sound that might have been laughter. His officers had studied the humans extensively. They had perhaps 20 operational warships, crude vessels powered by primitive technology. Their weapons were centuries behind engineering. Even if every human ship came, they would pose no threat to his fleet. "Let them call for help," he said. "It changes nothing. In 6 hours this station falls, and the humans will learn what happens when lesser species challenge the Dominion." Across the void, the message traveled at the speed of light. It passed through empty space, past dead moons and distant stars, carrying with it the desperate hope of 2 million souls. And somewhere in the darkness, someone was listening. Admiral Wei was eating breakfast when the message arrived. She sat in her quarters aboard Luna Station, Earth's primary military command center, reviewing reports from the previous night. At 62 years old, she had served in the United Earth Navy for 4 decades. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, negotiated with hostile species near the border, and built humanity's fleet from nothing into something that might one day matter. Her communications officer interrupted her meal with a priority alert, set down her coffee and listened to the transmission from Sovereignty Station. She heard the fear in the young alien's voice. She heard the desperation, the pleading, the certainty that no help would come. When the message ended, sat very still for a long moment. She walked to the command center, where her senior officers had already gathered. They stood around a holographic display showing the tactical situation. Sovereignty Station was marked in red, surrounded by the blue dots of the fleet. The scale of the attack was immediately clear. 200 warships, said Commander, her tactical officer. Class 7 dreadnoughts, at least 40 of them. The rest are cruisers and support vessels. The station's defenses are already gone. Civilians asked. 2.3 million, 17 species, mostly traders and their families. Captain, the fleet's logistics officer, spoke next. Admiral, Sovereignty Station is 4.7 light-years away. Even at maximum fold space velocity, we are looking at nearly 3 hours to arrive. By then, they will have breached the central core. Then we will need to move quickly, said. The room fell silent. The officers looked at each other, uncertain if they had heard correctly. Admiral, Commander said carefully, with respect, we have 17 operational warships. They have 200. We would be outnumbered more than 10 to 1. I can count, Commander. This is not our fight. The Galactic Compact has never expected us to respond to distress calls outside our sector. We are too new, too small. They barely consider us members. Turned to face her officers. Her expression was calm, but there was something hard in her eyes that made several of them look away. "How many of you have children?" she asked. A few hands rose hesitantly. "There are children on that station right now, hiding in the dark, listening to explosions, waiting for monsters to break through the doors. Their parents are holding them, telling them that help is coming, that someone will save them." She paused. "Are we going to prove them wrong?" "We could all die," Captain said quietly. "Every ship, every crew member, humanity's entire military presence in the galaxy wiped out in a single battle." "Yes," agreed. "We could. But I did not join the Navy to watch children die because saving them was inconvenient." She looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. "The Galactic Compact has spent 30 years treating us like a curiosity, a strange species from a strange world, useful for nothing important. They gave us a seat at their table because they were curious, not because they respected us. Well, today we show them what humans are made of. Today we answer the call." A young lieutenant named Park spoke up. He was new to the fleet, barely 25 years old. "Admiral, why do we name our ships after defeats? The Thermopylae, the Stalingrad, the Wounded Knee. These were all battles where we lost." Smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Because we name our ships after the moments that defined us. The moments when ordinary people faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. They lost the battle, Lieutenant, but they showed the universe what humans do when our backs are against the wall, and that is a lesson our enemies have never forgotten." She turned to the holographic display and began issuing orders. "Spin up every ship we have. The Thermopylae, the Stalingrad, the Wounded Knee, the Alamo, all of them. I want reactors at full power and fold space drives charging in 20 minutes. "All ships?" asked. "Admiral, if we leave Earth undefended?" "Earth has orbital platforms and planetary defenses. The station has nothing. We leave in 30 minutes. She looked at her officers. "Anyone who wants to stay behind, I will not stop you, but I am going. Who is coming with me?" For a moment no one moved. Then Lieutenant Park stepped forward. "I am with you, Admiral." One by one the others followed. Commander, Captain, every officer in the room nodded. "Get to your ships. We have work to do." In the hours that followed, Luna Station became a center of controlled chaos. Crews ran to their vessels, loading ammunition and checking systems. Engineers worked frantically to bring every ship to combat readiness. Messages flew between ships as captains confirmed their orders. Word spread through the fleet about what they were doing. Some crew members were afraid. Some were angry, but not one of them refused to go. On the bridge of the Thermopylae watched her fleet assemble. 17 ships, destroyers, frigates, 2 heavy cruisers, not a single vessel larger than the smallest dreadnought. They were, and flying toward almost certain death. She opened a channel to all ships. "Says Admiral, you all know where we are going and what we will face. The Compact never expected us to answer this call. They do not believe we are a threat. Today we prove them both wrong. We are humanity. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day of our existence, and we survived. We carry the names of every defeat that made us stronger. Today we add a new name to our history. Today we fight for strangers who called to us for help, because that is who we are. That is what we do. All ships engage fold space drives. See you on the other side." 17 ships disappeared into the darkness, leaving trails of light behind them. The journey took 2 hours and 47 minutes. The crews used the time to prepare. Weapons were loaded. Armor was checked. Marines practiced their boarding procedures. The ship chaplains held services for those who wanted them. No one slept. When the fleet emerged from fold space, they found exactly what they expected. 200 warships surrounding a dying station. Debris from the defense fleet floated in the darkness. Fires burned on the outer rings of the station, where missiles had breached the hull. They also saw the turn toward them. Sensors detected weapons locking onto their positions. The enemy fleet began to move, confident in their overwhelming advantage. Admiral opened a communication channel. Her voice was steady as she spoke. "Vessels, this is Admiral Way of the United Earth Navy. You have 15 seconds to withdraw from Sovereignty Station. This is your only warning." On the flagship, Supreme Commander received the transmission. He studied the human fleet on his tactical display. 17 small ships against his armada. The human admiral was either insane or stupid. "Destroy them," he ordered. The fleet opened fire. But the human ships were already moving. The human fleet did not behave like any fleet they had ever encountered. When faced with 200 warships, any sane commander would have maintained distance. They would have tried to find an angle of attack or looked for a weakness to exploit. They would have done anything except charge directly into the center of the enemy formation. Admiral ordered exactly that. The 17 human ships accelerated to full speed and drove straight into the heart of the fleet. Missiles exploded around them. Energy beams cut through the darkness. The destroyer Wounded Knee took a direct hit to its forward section, killing 30 crew members in an instant. It kept coming. Supreme Commander watched from his flagship with growing confusion. The humans were taking tremendous damage. Their shields were failing. Their hulls were burning. And yet they did not slow down. They did not retreat. They pushed deeper into his formation as if they wanted to die. "What are they doing?" he demanded. His tactical officer had no answer. The human fleet reached the center of the formation and did something that no one had anticipated. They stopped accelerating. They stopped trying to dodge. Instead, they positioned themselves directly alongside the largest ships and began launching boarding pods. They had never been boarded. In 1,000 years of conquest, no species had been foolish enough to try fighting them face to face. They were 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor, armed with 4 clawed limbs that could tear through metal. They were perfect soldiers, bred for combat, fearless and tireless. The humans did not seem to care. Boarding pods slammed into hulls, burning through armor with shaped charges. Airlocks were forced open, and then the Marines came through. On the dreadnought Eternal Conquest, a squad waited in the corridor where the boarding pod had attached. They were armed with plasma rifles and eager to kill the soft creatures foolish enough to invade their ship. When the airlock opened, they fired immediately, filling the corridor with superheated death. Sergeant Cole came through the breach first, his squad right behind him. He was not a large man by human standards. He stood barely over 6 feet tall and weighed less than 100 kilograms. By standards, he should have been easy prey. He took a plasma bolt to the shoulder within the first second. The impact spun him halfway around, and the smell of burning flesh filled his helmet. He did not fall. He raised his rifle and put 3 rounds through the nearest's head. They had studied humans. They knew that humans were soft, that they bled easily, that they could not survive damage the way other species could. What they had not understood was that humans did not need to survive damage. They only needed to keep fighting long enough to kill you first. Cole's squad pushed forward through the corridor. They moved in pairs, covering each other, communicating with hand signals and brief words. When one of them fell, the others stepped over the body and kept going. There was no hesitation, no pause to mourn. They would grieve later. Right now, they had work to do. They fought hard. They were strong and fast, and their claws could cut through combat armor. A warrior killed Private Santos by tearing out his throat. Private shot the warrior in the back while it was still holding Santos's body. When her rifle jammed, she pulled out a knife and finished the next one by hand. They could not understand what they were seeing. These creatures should have broken. They should have run. Every other species in the galaxy would have retreated after suffering such losses. but the humans kept coming. They pushed through corridor after corridor, leaving trails of blood, both red and green, behind them. On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, the captain received reports that made no sense. Human invaders on Deck 7, Deck 12, Deck 3. They were everywhere, fighting through his crew, taking losses that should have stopped any assault and still advancing. "How many of them are there?" he demanded. "Perhaps 60, his officer replied. "Maybe fewer now, they have lost many." 60 humans are fighting through a ship with a crew of 3,000. "Yes, Captain, they do not stop." Similar scenes played out across the fleet. Human Marines boarded one dreadnought after another. They died in terrible numbers, but they took with them. And while they fought inside the ships, the human warships continued their attack from outside. The Thermopolis flagship had positioned itself alongside the largest vessel and was firing point-blank into its engine section. The cruiser Stalingrad had rammed a destroyer, pushing it into another ship and destroying both. The Alamo was on fire from bow to stern, and still its weapons fired. Watched the battle unfold with something he had never felt before. It took him a long time to recognize the emotion. It was doubt. "Concentrate fire on the largest human vessel," he ordered. "Destroy their flagship. This will break their morale." 40 ships turned their weapons on the Thermopylae. The human cruiser's shields failed. Its hull was breached in a dozen places. Fires erupted throughout the ship. And still it fought, still it moved, still it refused to die. On the bridge, Admiral wiped blood from her face. The explosion had thrown her from her chair, and a piece of metal had cut her forehead. Around her, her crew was dying. Smoke filled the air. Alarms screamed. "Damage report," she said. "Main engines at 30%. Shields are gone. We have hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. Casualties." Paused. "Heavy casualties, Admiral." "Can we still move?" "Barely." "Then move. Take us alongside their flagship. I want to look that bug in the eyes." The Thermopylae limped forward, leaving a trail of debris and bodies behind it. Other human ships fell in around it, what was left of them. They formed a wedge, pointing directly at the command vessel. Watched them come. He had killed 3 of their ships already. The rest were crippled and burning. They should have surrendered. They should have fled. Any sane species would have. But the humans kept coming. On the Eternal Conquest, Sergeant Cole and what remained of his squad finally reached the bridge. There were 4 of them left, out of the 12 who had started. Cole was bleeding from wounds on his shoulder, his leg, and his side. He could barely stand. But when the door opened and he saw the captain waiting for him, he smiled. "Surprise," he said, and raised his rifle. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Human Marines reached engine rooms and weapons bays and bridges. They planted charges. They sabotaged systems. They did everything they could to hurt the enemy before they died. And in the darkness between the ships, Admiral gave her final order. "All vessels, this is the Admiral. Prepare for close combat. We are going to board their flagship." She paused. "I will lead the assault personally." "Admiral, you cannot," began. "I can and I will. If we are going to ask our people to die, we should be willing to die beside them." She stood and pulled on her combat armor. "Take command of the ship, Commander. Keep her fighting as long as you can." She walked to the airlock where a boarding pod waited. Around her, Marines gathered, ready to follow their admiral into the heart of the enemy fleet. They launched, and on the flagship, began to realize that he might have made a terrible mistake. The boarding pod struck the hull of the flagship with enough force to crack bone. Admiral felt the impact through her entire body, but she was already moving before the vibration stopped. The cutting charge burned through the enemy hull, and then she was through, stepping into the dim red light of a corridor with her rifle raised. She had brought 20 Marines with her. By the time they reached the first intersection, she had 15. They were waiting for them. They had known the humans would try to board, and they had prepared. Warriors lined every corridor, plasma weapons ready, claws extended. They were the elite guards of the Supreme Commander himself, the best soldiers the Dominion had produced. Shot the first one between its compound eyes and kept moving. The fighting was brutal and close. There was no strategy, no clever tactics. There was only violence, pure and simple, one species against another in the narrow corridors of a warship. They had every advantage. They were bigger, stronger, and better armed. They knew the layout of their own ship. They outnumbered the humans 20-1. None of it mattered. Had been a soldier for 40 years. She had trained in every environment Earth could offer, from frozen mountains to burning deserts. She had learned to fight through pain, through exhaustion, through injuries that would have stopped anyone else. She had buried friends and kept going. She had lost battles and refused to quit. They were strong, but they had never faced anything like her. A warrior lunged at her with all four arms extended. She ducked under its strike, planted her boot in its knee joint, and fired 3 rounds into its chest as it fell. Another came at her from behind. She spun, grabbed its claw before it could reach her, and used its own momentum to throw it into the wall. A Marine finished it with a burst of gunfire. "Keep moving," ordered. "Bridge is 3 decks up." They fought through corridor after corridor. They threw everything they had at the human assault team. Elite warriors, automated defenses, even explosive traps designed to bring down entire sections of the ship. Lost Marines at every turn. But the survivors kept pushing forward, driven by something they could not understand. On the bridge, Supreme Commander received reports that grew more alarming by the minute. Human boarders were making progress despite impossible odds. His own ship was being invaded, its crew slaughtered by creatures that should have been easy prey. And outside, the battle was no longer going as planned. His tactical display showed the chaos. Human ships, burning and broken, were still fighting. They had destroyed or disabled 47 vessels, an impossible number given their size and technology. More ships were damaged, their crews fighting human Marines inside their own hulls. The beautiful formation of his fleet had become a tangled mess of debris and violence. "Order the fleet to concentrate fire on the crippled human vessels," he commanded. "Destroy them one at a time." "Commander, our ships are having difficulty coordinating. The human tactics are unusual." "Unusual how?" "They do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not protect their own vessels. They do not retreat when damaged. Several of their ships have deliberately rammed our vessels, destroying both." The officer paused. "They appear to consider their own survival secondary to causing us harm." His mandibles clicked in frustration. They had conquered 37 worlds by being superior in every way that mattered. Stronger, faster, more numerous. They had never needed to account for an enemy that simply did not care about dying. The doors to his bridge shuddered. Something was burning through from the other side. "How many guards remain outside?" he demanded. "None, Commander. They are all dead." The doors exploded inward. Through the smoke and fire, a small figure emerged. It was the human admiral, her armor scorched and dented, her face covered in blood that was both red and green. Behind her came the remnants of her assault team. 5 humans out of the 20 who had started. They had killed over 100 to reach this room. Looked around the bridge, taking in the officers at their stations, the guards moving to intercept her, the massive figure of the Supreme Commander himself. She was exhausted. She was wounded in more places than she could count. She had watched friends die in the corridors behind her. She smiled. "Supreme Commander," she said, "I am Admiral Wei. I would like to discuss your surrender." Rose to his full height, towering over the small human. "You are insane. You have lost half your fleet. Your ship is crippled. You are standing in the heart of my command with 5 soldiers, and you speak of my surrender." "Yes." "Why should I surrender? I still have over 150 warships. You have nothing." shook her head. You have 150 ships that watched 47 of their brothers die today. Ships whose crews are afraid, for the first time in their lives, because they have seen what we can do. Ships that will remember this battle and wonder if they really want to fight us again. She stepped forward, ignoring the guards who raised their weapons. Her eyes never left the Supreme Commander. We came here with 17 ships. We knew we would probably die. We came anyway because someone called for help. That is who we are. That is what we do. And I promise you this, if you continue this attack, if you hurt one more civilian on that station, humanity will not stop until the Dominion is a memory. We will come with every ship we have, every soldier, every weapon. We will burn your worlds and salt the ground, not because we want to, but because you will have given us no choice. She was so close now that she could see her reflection in his compound eyes. You have studied humans. You know we come from you know what that means. Every generation of our species was forged in blood. Every one of us carries the survival of 1,000,000 years in our bones. You think you are warriors, but we are the children of a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we are still here. Silence filled the bridge. The guards waited for their commander's order. The human marine stood ready to die. Looked at the human female standing before him. She was small, weak, wounded beyond any reasonable limit of endurance. She should have been dead a dozen times over. And yet she stood there, demanding his surrender, and he could not shake the feeling that she meant every word. I refuse, he said. Nodded, I thought you might. She moved faster than any thought possible. Her knife was in her hand before the guards could react, and then it was in his throat. The Supreme Commander staggered back, green blood pouring down his chest. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. The guards lunged forward. His Marines opened fire. In the chaos that followed, the bridge became a slaughterhouse. Humans and died together in a fury of violence that would be remembered for generations. When the shooting stopped, Admiral was the only human left standing. She leaned against a console, bleeding from wounds too numerous to count. Around her lay the bodies of her Marines, her friends, her family. But the Supreme Commander was dead, and on the tactical display, she could see the fleet beginning to break apart, ships fleeing in all directions as word spread of what had happened on the flagship. She opened a channel to whatever ships could still hear her. This is Admiral. The command structure has been eliminated. All remaining enemy vessels are ordered to withdraw from Sovereignty Station immediately. If they refuse, destroy them. Then she sat down on the deck, closed her eyes, and waited for rescue or death, whichever came first. 3 days after the battle, Sovereignty Station was still standing. The fires had been put out, the hull breaches sealed, and the 2 million civilians who had waited for death were slowly beginning to believe that they might actually live. Ambassador stood in the observation deck, watching the human fleet maintain its protective formation around the station. What remained of it, at least? Of the 17 ships that had answered the distress call, only 13 still functioned. 4 had been destroyed completely, their crews lost. The survivors were battered beyond recognition, held together with emergency patches and desperate repairs. 6,000 human beings had died in the battle. 6,000 souls, lost defending a station full of strangers. Could not stop thinking about that number. They had fled. After the death of Supreme Commander, the remaining fleet had lost all coordination. Some ships had surrendered. Others had tried to run and been cut down by the vengeful human vessels. Nearly 80 warships had been destroyed or captured. It was the worst defeat in the history of the Dominion. And it had been delivered by a species that the galaxy barely considered relevant. A medical shuttle docked with the station and went to meet it. He found Admiral being carried out on a stretcher, surrounded by human doctors who were still working to keep her alive. She had suffered 17 separate wounds during the assault on the flagship. By all medical logic, she should have been dead. But her eyes were open, and when she saw, she managed a weak smile. Ambassador, she said, your station's still standing. Thanks to you, Admiral, thanks to all of you. Shook her head slightly. We lost a lot of good people. I know, and I am sorry. I am so sorry that we asked you to come, that we put you in this position. You did not put us anywhere. We chose to come. She coughed, and one of the doctors said something sharp to her about resting. She ignored him. How are your people? Thought about the question. How was he supposed to answer? His people were alive because of human sacrifice. They were safe because beings from a distant world had thrown away their lives for strangers. He did not have words for what he felt. We are grateful, he said finally, more than I can express. Closed her eyes. Good, that is good. The doctors took her away and was left standing in the corridor, feeling very small and very humble. Over the following days, the news of the battle spread across the galaxy. Every species in the Galactic Compact heard the story. 17 human ships against 200. An impossible victory won through sheer determination and willingness to die. A supreme commander killed on his own bridge by a wounded admiral who had fought through 100 guards to reach him. The Compact held an emergency session to discuss what had happened. Representatives from every member species gathered in the Great Hall, and for the first time in living memory, they talked about humans not as a curiosity, but as a force to be reckoned with. They answered a distress call from a station 4.7 light-years away, one delegate said. They had no obligation to come. They gained nothing from the battle. Why did they do it? Because we asked, Ambassador replied. Because someone was in trouble and they could help. But the cost? They knew the cost. They came anyway. The hall fell silent. For species who had spent calculating advantages and measuring risks, the human behavior was almost impossible to understand. What kind of beings threw away their lives for strangers? What kind of species treated death as an acceptable price for saving people they had never met? The Dominion sent an envoy a week later. For the first time in their history, they requested a ceasefire. They did not admit defeat, but they made it clear that they had no interest in fighting the humans again. The envoy spoke of the battle in hushed tones, describing scenes that his commanders could not explain. Human soldiers who fought through wounds that should have killed them. Ships that rammed enemy vessels, destroying themselves to cause harm. An admiral who led an assault into the heart of an enemy flagship and killed the supreme commander with a knife. They had no framework for understanding such behavior. It terrified them in ways they could not articulate. The ceasefire was signed. The war ended before it had really begun. Months later, Admiral returned to Sovereignty Station for a ceremony in her honor. She walked with a cane now, the damage to her body too severe to fully repair. But she walked, which the doctors said was a miracle in itself. The 17 species of the station had come together to create a memorial. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone with 6,000 names carved into its surface. Each name was a human who had died in the battle. Each name was a life given so that strangers might live. Stood before the memorial for a long time, reading the names. She knew most of them, who had commanded the Thermopylae after she left to board the flagship. The Marine who had killed her with a knife after her rifle jammed. Santos, Cole, Park, and so many others. Friends, colleagues, brothers, and sisters in arms. Ambassador approached her quietly. Admiral, may I ask you something? Of course. When you received our distress call, you could have ignored it. No one would have blamed you. Your fleet was small, your people few. Why did you come? Looked at the names on the wall. She thought about who had known they would probably die and had come anyway. She thought about the young Marines who had followed her onto the flagship without hesitation. She thought about humanity, born on a world that tried to kill them every day, and how they had survived by helping each other. Because you called, she said simply. Because you needed help and we could give it. That is all the reason we have ever needed. Nodded slowly. He still did not fully understand, but he was beginning to. The ceremony ended, and the dignitaries departed, and Sovereignty Station returned to its normal routines. But something had changed. The galaxy was not the same as it had been before the battle. Species that had ignored humans now looked at them with new eyes. Empires that had considered expansion now thought twice. And in the quiet corners of 1,000 worlds, strategists updated their assessments of the strange from the small blue planet. They added notes about human determination, about their willingness to sacrifice, about the terrifying things they would do when someone they protected was threatened. But the most important note was the simplest. Under human military doctrine, they wrote, when asked why they fight, humans do not speak of territory or resources. They do not speak of pride or revenge. They speak of one thing only, duty. They believe they have an obligation to help those who cannot help themselves. They believe that some things are worth dying for. The galaxy had faced conquerors before. It had faced predators and monsters and tyrants, but it had never faced anything like this. A species that measured victory not in ground taken or enemies killed, but in lives saved and promises kept. They had expected victory. They had every advantage, every reason to believe they would win, but they had not accounted for one simple fact. When someone calls for help, humans answer. And that changes everything.